Happy Friday! Welcome back to Drinking by My Shelf. My name is Emma and this is Balancing the Books. Are you ready for my spiel? If you are new here, Balancing the Books is the game where I add up all of the books that came onto my TBR and all of the books that went off my TBR and I try and make those numbers balance. Literally no one invited a fly into the room. So my TBR is getting so reasonable right now. I am so pleased. At the end of April, I finished with 38 books on my TBR. Technically, I needed that number to be 37 in order for my books to be balanced. Usually what happens if my books aren't balanced at the end of the month is I have to unhaul extra books in order to even the scales, but I do have a little get out clause that we invented recently. We all came up with it together where I am allowed to put a book into a kind of purgatory and it has to be the oldest book on my TBR. So the one that has been sitting there for the longest without me reading it, I can choose to put that one as like a sacrificial offering into purgatory and I have to read it within the next month or I have to get rid of it. And that is exactly what happened last month. The oldest book left on my shelf was basically my whole Persephone collection. So any of the Persephone books had been there for an equally long amount of time, but I chose this one, The Crowded Street by Winifred Holtby, and I have read it. So that means, good news, my March books are now balanced. And before I move on to my April books, I'm just going to tell you what I thought of this book, because I gave it 5 stars and I bloody loved it. I can't believe it came so close to being a sacrificial offering. This book spans 20 years in the life of our main character, Muriel. We first meet her in 1900 when she is like 11 years old, going to a party. That's just a like one scene little prologue. She's going to a party, she's so excited, it's her kind of entrance into the adult world. But when she gets to the party, much as she is loving it, just loving like watching everyone dance around, looking at the decorations, she slowly realizes all the ways in which she is falling short of how she is supposed to be. She's not getting her dance card filled. She doesn't even seem to be interested in dancing and meeting eligible bachelors because she's a kid, and she eats the food at the wrong time and disgraces herself. So that is like an opening scene that shows this character Muriel, who inherently has this like wonder and excitement for life, being very firmly shown there is only one way for a woman in this society to be, and you better live up to that or you're nothing. And from there we then follow her growing up over the next 20 years and slowly kind of having her spirit crushed. She goes from wanting to study astronomy to realizing that she just has to stay home and do what her mother says and just wait and hope that eventually some man will ask her to marry him, even though personally she has no particular interest or excitement about getting married at all. And the book is divided up into 5 parts, and they each have a name. It's a very, very feminist book. So this was actually, I got this one for Christmas a few years ago in a box set of feminist Persephone classics. And so the parts of the book are all divided up and named after important women to her at that stage in her life. But most importantly, the final part, book 5, is Muriel. This is where she takes all of the lessons and everything that she has learnt about life and about herself and makes her own decisions. So I loved it. I thought it was dreamy, I thought it was sad. Nothing really happens and yet it was really gripping. I couldn't put it down. I loved the way it was written. I will say, just as a warning, like very, very close to the end, there were just suddenly, I found it very jarring and unexpected, some very extremely anti-Semitic references. It was basically just in like a couple of pages. It's from a character who is supposed to be a very likeable character in the story, and he just says these really anti-Semitic things and it's never questioned, and I guess that's just a product of the time that this was written. It's not a major part of the story, but it was just to warn you, there were these like very jarring references thrown in, which kind of threw me for a minute. So there you go, another beloved addition to my Persephone collection. I've given almost every Persephone book I've written 5 stars. They're just all fantastic, and I always get so nervous about reading them because I think they're going to be inaccessible, but this was absolutely brilliant, and I would actually really recommend this as a place to start if you are interested in reading the Persephone classics. I found it really accessible. you do have to be ready for a book in which nothing really happens, but I found it really, really lovely to read. So there you go, March books balanced. Let's move on to my April balancing the books, and I've got such a huge stack in front of me. However, even though I have such a huge stack in front of me, I've just realised the 2 books I want to talk about next are upstairs, so let me go get them. Okay, so this next thing might seem a little surprising, seeing as I just rambled on about how much I love Persephone books, but after having finished that last one and then looking at my collection, I was kind of going through how many I still have left on that shelf that I haven't read yet. And of the, I think it's 4 that I haven't read, of those 4, I realised that there are 2 of them that just really aren't calling my name. These came as part of that box set, so they weren't individually chosen, and there are so many Persephone books that I want to read, like I'm going to end up with a huge collection. I realised that these 2 maybe just aren't ones that I need to read. This one is a non-fiction book. It's called A Woman's Place 1910 to 1975, so while I'm sure it is full of very interesting things, I'm not a huge non-fiction reader, and I think I might just find this a bit sad, reading non-fiction about what a woman's place was. I found it sad enough reading it in like the fictional story, but fiction always captures my heart and brings me to a happy, beautiful place, whereas non-fiction does not. So I think I'm going to donate this one, and someone else hopefully will really enjoy it and learn a lot. I also have a fiction book here called No Surrender by Constance Maud, which is about a suffragette. I don't know why, like, I loved the movie Suffragette. I obviously think the suffragettes are fascinating and did incredible things for us, but something about reading a book that's literally just telling a sad story about a suffragette and reading about men not wanting women to have votes, like, it's not calling to me. I don't think it'll make my heart soar. Soar, S-O-A-R. It might make my heart soar, S-O-R-E. So No Surrender is also going in my donation pile, and I'm excited to think that someone will really, really enjoy this one. Okay, so we're kicking off strong with books leaving the TBR. Then there is a book that I read, The Wangs versus the World by Jade Chang. So I read this one with my offline friends book club. I really, really liked this one. It wasn't what I expected at all. So I had heard this one pitched as like a Schitt's Creek storyline, and so I went into it really expecting that. And it's also been described as like very, very hilarious, and I did find it funny at parts, but I mostly found it more emotional than that. So it is a kind of Schitt's Creek storyline. It's about a very wealthy... Oh no, my camera battery's running out. Okay, back. Camera batteries are not what they used to be. So this one is about a very wealthy Chinese-American family who lose all their money. It's set in 2008 during the recession, and the patriarch of the family, his business loses all its money, and so their life completely changes. And this book is about this road trip across the country, basically picking up each of the children from their various expensive schools and going to stay with the oldest socialite artist daughter in upstate New York. I thought the characters were developed amazingly in this book. I really believed all of them as characters. I felt like I knew them. I kept discovering more things about them. So it was really, really readable, really emotional. Just, yeah, a really good book I'd absolutely recommend. The only reason that I didn't end up loving this one is actually I felt like I wished I had read this at school or somewhere where we were kind of all together analysing it and I could learn a bit more about it, because I felt like there was context that I wasn't understanding. And in part I think it's because this is a book that isn't catering to me. So one thing that I noticed that I appreciated was there are quite a lot of little words in Chinese or little sentences in Chinese that don't get translated for the author. And I appreciated that because I never would have thought of it myself, not giving myself any credit for this, but I have heard people who are bilingual or people from kind of multiple cultures say that they find it very irritating in books where everything's translated clearly for like a white American or British audience. And I appreciated in this one that the author was like, no, like if you want to know what this word is, you can Google it. This is written for people who fully know what this culture is like. They know the experience of being a second generation immigrant who is completely fluent in English. The kids are very American, but also constantly switching between languages. And also I found it really interesting seeing the way that they perceive their father, who's this incredibly successful, up until the start of this book, incredibly successful business owner, and quite like formidable, and he deliberately didn't learn English very well because he didn't want to cater to the Americans. He was like, it's my business, I will speak in my language. And so it's kind of this like power move almost, the fact that he isn't very fluent in English. But then it's really interesting seeing that versus the perception we do have, I'm sure in the States, I know we do in England, we do have this very like racist or xenophobic kind of superiority complex when it comes to people speaking in broken English, which is ridiculous, because if someone is speaking to you in broken English, especially in like a business context, then they are brave and amazing enough to know two languages and to be doing a job in a language that isn't their own. Like, that's incredible. So it has this stereotype of being seen as a weakness, and it was so interesting to see this different perspective of it being a strength, but then also the way the kids could kind of see both sides. I'm rambling. It was really good, and I really enjoyed the book club that we had on this because we talked about so many different aspects. But I feel, ultimately there were a lot of layers that I probably didn't even uncover, and I would love someone to help me do that. Then I read How to Save a Life by Eva Carter. It looks like this. I read this one for a read-along that I ran at work with a bunch of Instagrammers. So that was really fun. I really enjoyed the experience of reading it. And I really enjoyed this book a lot more than I expected that I would. If you've been around this channel for a while, you'll know that this isn't really a genre that I would usually lean towards. But I was really actually pleasantly surprised by how much I liked this one. It's another one that spans like 20 years. So it starts on New Year's Eve 2000, it's the eve of the millennium, and these three teenagers are at a party and one of them collapses, and it's basically about the effects of this night. He survives, but it's about the effects of this night over the next few decades of their life, and we kind of constantly keep switching between the perspectives of the three characters, and I found myself getting like really invested in the story, really switching between which characters I hated and loved and whose team I was on. So yeah, it was just a really fun read. Then I read That Night by Gillian McAllister, who was one of my favourite thriller authors, and I didn't love this one, and I feel I'm just scared to even say it out loud because I love Jade McAllister, I really, really respect her, but this one just wasn't my favourite. It's basically a thriller about these three siblings who are on holiday together, and in the middle of the night, the premise is, your sister calls, she's killed a man, what do you do? So one of the sisters has hit a man with her car. It turns out to be a man that they had had an altercation with earlier that day, which looks suspicious, and the other siblings have to decide what they're going to do, if they're going to help her cover up this murder. There are various twists and turns along the way, which I really enjoyed. I think just overall, it's probably a really, really just personal reason why I didn't get on with this one as much. So Gillian McAllister is very, very good at creating characters, something that you often get sacrificed a little bit in thrillers if they're very plot heavy, as the characters aren't quite as believable. Whereas Gillian McAllister never falls into that trap. Her characters always feel so real and so interesting and so different from each other, and so I think that it's just a personal thing that I didn't connect with these particular characters, and possibly it's because of the sibling relationship. So I love books about siblings. I have an incredibly close relationship with my sister, as a lot of you know, and this is a book about siblings who seem to be close but actually really struggle to get on. There's a brother who is really close to one of the sisters, and then there's another sister who is just kind of a bit left out, and I found that just so like upsetting to read that I just didn't enjoy it, because I wanted to see a better sibling relationship between them all. And then possibly because of that, I just found myself not as engaged as I usually am with the story while reading the book. I didn't find it as like page turning as I usually do. So I'm sad to say that, because I really love Gillian McAllister and her books, and I hope that she isn't watching this, because I know she sometimes does watch my videos, and if you are, your books are great, this one just wasn't my favourite. Then another proof, another one that sadly I didn't really like, is The End of Men by Christina Sweeney-Baird. So this one is about a pandemic, and this one I feel is actually such bad luck for the author, because she wrote this in 2019. So she could have had no way of knowing what was about to happen, but the experience of reading this book during a pandemic is not great. And I felt like it was unfair to the author because there was really no way she could win. At times, I was resenting how accurate everything was. I was like, I don't want to read about social distancing. I don't want to read about all these like mundane inconveniences that have been put onto our lives. The actual like panic of the pandemic, the much more serious end of things, the tragedies going on, those bits, funnily enough, I didn't mind reading while being in a pandemic. But just kind of the very accurate bits about how life changes day to day, I was like, I don't want to read that, it's too real. But then she also couldn't win because whenever anything was different from what had actually happened, I didn't like that either. I was like, well, that's silly, that's not how it went. So really, there was no way that she could win. The premise in here is terrifying. It's about a very, very deadly pandemic with an 100% mortality rate. It only affects men. There are some men who seem to be immune to it, but a huge portion of the male population is wiped out. And there are loads and loads of different characters in this book that we're hearing their different perspectives, and so there are loads and loads of really sad scenes of all these different characters losing the men in their life. But ultimately, it just felt a bit like reading the news. Okay, we've been doing too well on one end of the scale, so this is the first book that I hauled. This is Love's Executioner and Other Tales of Psychotherapy by Irvin D. Yalom. This one I borrowed from my friend Christy, so I haven't read it yet. Christy and I are in the same book club as all of our friends from uni, and we had previously read the book Maybe You Should Talk to Someone, I think that's what it's called, which is about, it's a non-fiction book about a therapist, and we all really enjoyed talking about that one. So she lent me this, which is along a similar theme. I think what she was saying was that in this one, we go like more in depth into the case studies of these particular clients that he worked with, or patients that he worked with. What's the right word? Don't remember. Patients, it says it here. And it sounds really interesting. I just find therapy very, very interesting. So excited to read that one. I hauled the book Our Souls at Night by Kent Haruf. I have to say it very carefully. I feel like he's American, the author is American, and possibly in an American accent it doesn't become a problem, this title. But the second you say it in my voice, I'm just saying Our Souls at Night. But I hauled the book Our Souls at Night after I watched the Netflix movie and loved it. It was so sweet. It's about these two neighbours called Robert Redford and Jane Fonda. I can't remember their actual names, who live next to each other. They have their whole lives, they had their own families, and they are now older and a little bit lonely, and they come up with this arrangement where they will sleep together at nights, literally just meaning sleep together in the same beds, just to kind of have someone to spend that lonely time with. And it was a really, really beautiful movie, so I got the book. Then I bought myself The Beginning of the World in the Middle of the Night by Jen Campbell. This is her short story collection, and I haven't read it yet, but I've always kind of had it in my mind that it's Jen Campbell, I really want to read her book, so I finally decided now is the time, and I bought it. I can't tell you anything else about it, but you know who Jen Campbell is, it's going to be brilliant. Then I read The Lamplighters by Emma Stonex, which I'd had on my TBR for a little while, and this one is very interesting. I mean, firstly, can we just appreciate it's got the most beautiful cover I've ever seen in my whole life. Also got very lovely end papers. It's just a beautiful book. This is based on a true story about some 3 lighthouse keepers who went missing mysteriously. So that was a true story that happened in like 1900 in Scotland, but Emma Stonex is inspired by that and then made up her own story based in Cornwall in the 1970s. And so we go between these two timelines, 1970s from the men's perspective before they go missing, and the 1990s from the perspectives of the women that they left behind, and a writer who is kind of digging into the mystery of what happened. And so we flash back and forth between these two, and it's very strange, and I feel like I didn't fully understand it, to be honest. There's a kind of, it's one of those books with a kind of supernatural element that you're not quite sure if you're ever supposed to actually think it is supernatural, which I do really like. But this one I felt like was so ambiguous that I honestly got to the end and was like, I'm not sure. Did it tell me the answer? It's not even like it was just left ambiguous, like, oh, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to think. It was left where I was like, I think maybe it told me the answer and I didn't get it. Like, there's one bit where it literally just flat out tells you a factual version of events, but I wasn't sure if we were supposed to take that at face value or not. I think I might need to read it again. It's very beautifully written. It's also written in a way that is quite, it's not like easy reading. You can't just skim your way through it. It's like quite stilted almost. It's like, it's choppy like the sea. Then I read Tell Me Your Secret by Dorothy Koomson, which is a thriller which I found really page-turning and really fun. Ultimately, like, I didn't love it by the end. It wasn't an amazing ending, but it was like a solid 3-star, really fun read. It's a very creepy premise. It's about a serial killer who 10 years ago, I think, or even longer ago, like 10, 15 years ago, was kidnapping these women, and he would make them have their eyes closed for the whole weekend. He would keep them like trapped with him for a weekend, and they had to have their eyes closed, and if they opened their eyes he would kill them. And so we have two main perspectives in this book, and one of them is one of the women who managed to survive this weekend with this serial killer. The other perspective is a police officer who is investigating the case in present day but also has links to it. We'll find all of that out. But why it's relevant now, 15 years later, is that same serial killer has started tracking down the women who he let go at the end of their weekends and murdering them. It's very, very creepy. I was really enjoying it for the majority of the book, but I didn't think the ending quite worked for me. I am going to include this one in a video I'm going to do soon on spoiling thrillers. I did that once like a year ago, 2 years ago. I did like a spoiling popular thrillers so that you don't have to read them video, and people keep asking me to do it again. So I will spoil this book in that video coming soon. Watch this space. I was sent this book by the publisher. This is The Last House on Needless Street by Katrina Ward, and honestly I have no idea what it's about, so I can't tell you. No description I have read or heard has given me any clue of what this book is about, so I think it's going to be a very weird read. One of my colleagues read it and said it was a very weird read, so we'll see. Apparently some of it is from the perspective of a cat. This one I hauled from work, Magma by Thora Hjorliefsdottir, and this one is about a young woman, she's 20 or in her 20s, in an emotionally abusive relationship, but it's apparently like very creepily subtle. It's like the tiny little acts of abuse that she doesn't even notice at first, but that all build to become this incredibly toxic relationship. And I had a look at this one in the try a chapter tag video I did recently, and like all of the chapters are super short. Oh, that one's called Oral Sex. They're all just like a page, so I think this is one that I'll read very quickly. Then I read Burn Our Bodies Down by Rory Power, and I'm actually not going to tell you my thoughts on this one because I'm going to do a video. Basically, a while ago I did a Trash My Physical TBR video and got you guys to leave comments on which of my books you think that I should just like trash and not bother reading. And there were 4 books on that list that got the most comments, the most trashings. And so, being contrarian, I decided that instead of unhauling those 4 books, I was going to read those 4 books and see if maybe you and I just have really different taste, or if I should just listen to you all along. Burn Our Bodies Down was one of the books that got really trashed in that video. I have now read it, and I'm going to save my thoughts for a video I'll do once I've read all 4 of those. So we can see what the results are. Do our tastes align? Another proof from work, this is Yours Cheerfully by AJ Pearce. This is the sequel to Dear Mrs. Bird, and I am so excited to read it. I put this in my 5-star predictions video. I read Dear Mrs. Bird right before I started my job at Macneal, and I loved it and I gave it 5 stars, and I have such fond memories of just how excited I was while reading it because I was about to start like my first proper job in publishing. It's set in World War II, and it's about a woman who gets a job like working for an agony aunt. She's not supposed to be answering the letters, but she starts to, and then in this sequel she is now actually taking on that role. And the last one was just so jolly. Like, there was a lot of emotional stuff in it, but it was just so jolly, and I feel like it's just exactly what I need. And I also hauled this proof, Circus of Wonders by Elizabeth Macneal. So Elizabeth Macneal is the author of The Doll Factory, which is this like historical fiction thriller I read a couple years ago and loved. Circus of Wonders is her next book, coming out this month, and it's set in the circus, as you might guess. And so I'm just really excited. Elizabeth Macneal is really good with historical fiction at bringing like a time and place and a feeling to life, and so I think she's going to do wonders with the circus. It's about a girl who is sold into the circus by her father, and she's kind of like beloved by the press. She has these birthmarks on her body, these very distinctive birthmarks that earn her the nickname Leopard Girl. And so she is like the 8th wonder of the world. People absolutely adore her. She makes the circus loads of money. But this book is about, well, who gets to tell her version of the story? I was sent this proof by the publisher. This is Hostage by Clare Mackintosh. Again, I put this one into my 5-star predictions, so you can go have a look there. It's set all in one flight, and I love Clare Mackintosh. I've read 4 of her books. 2 of them I've absolutely loved, 2 of them I haven't really liked that much. They were fine, but this, just the premise of this, makes me think it's going to be back to like her most tense, gripping thrillers, which I so fell in love with her for in the first place. So yeah, can't wait. It says on the back, hostage will have you questioning what would you do at every turn, and I love that feeling in thrillers. I got this one from work. This is Brood by Jackie Polzin. It's about a woman keeping a brood of chickens alive throughout this year, but it's also about grief and motherhood and marriage. Karen Joy Fowler says it's full of surprise, humour, grief and wisdom, and just the right amount of chickens. And seeing as my family just got chickens last year and we're kind of all obsessed with them, I couldn't resist. Okay, if you have seen the video I posted recently called Reading What My Mum Tells Me to Read, you will see that I hauled these 3 books and read these 3 books, so we keep that even. You can see my full reviews of these books in that video, so I'll keep it short here. I will just say that 3 Hours by Rosamund Lupton was absolutely incredible. 5-star, very literary thriller, so emotional. Like, I was expecting to feel my heart banging the whole way through, but I didn't know I would be nearly crying the whole way through as well. I can't stop talking about this book. I know so many people who have read it, and we all just like can't stop talking about it. It has a ton of twists and turns, and I am going to include this one in my spoiling thrillers video. Not because I think you shouldn't read it, because I absolutely think that you should, but not everyone will like be able to stomach it. It's about a school shooting, so it's absolutely terrifying premise, and I know there will be people who just don't want to put themselves through the experience of reading a book like that, especially one like this that's so immersive and you feel like you're there. And so if you know that you just can't handle it, but you're intrigued about the twists and turns, I will be telling you everything that happens in that spoiler video coming soon. But I really recommend, if you can handle it, read this book. It's terrifying, and one of the things I appreciated the most about it is she is really tackling like a very real danger. So as well as being this like page-turning thriller, and as well as being this very literary character study, it's also bringing up very real issues, a very important thing that we need to talk about and pay attention to in the world. So yeah, it's fantastic. I'll be briefer on the other 2, but Mother by S.E. Lynes I really enjoyed. It was just very creepy and foreboding the whole way through, and then it has a very melodramatic ending, but melodramatic in a way that I really enjoyed. Both my mum and my sister didn't like the ending. I think they just thought it was a bit silly. I thought it was fantastic, and again, I will tell you what the ending was in that spoiler video. And Defending Jacob by William Landay I thought was fine, to be honest. Possibly it suffered from me reading it immediately after 3 hours, and so because this one's a lot slower, I just like didn't get sucked in as much. It has a good twist ending, which I will reveal in the spoiling thrillers video, but it was fine. I recommend it, but I don't like push it into your hands. So yeah, as I said, right now you can see my reviews of all 3 of those books in the video I made with my mum, and very soon you'll be able to find the full synopses of those books in my spoiler video. Amazingly, we still have not finished. I hauled Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. This is the next book that I'm reading with my uni book club girls. I don't really know what to expect of this one. It's the winner of the Women's Prize for Fiction 2020. So, you know, obviously lots of people thought it was really good, and it's something about Shakespeare. I don't really know anything about Shakespeare, but I'm intrigued and excited to find out really what it's about. I haven't told you anything useful because I don't think I know anything useful yet. You may have seen on my Instagram stories me absolutely losing my shit over this one. So this is How Stella Learned to Talk, which is a story of this woman, Christina Hunger, who is a speech therapist and started using some of the same methodologies with her dog. And she created this like soundboard of loads of different buttons that each played like one word, and through that taught her dog how to communicate with her, and it's absolutely like amazing. Google it, look at them on Instagram. But I got this proof from work that is personalised, and it's called How Hippo Learned to Talk. And it came with like dog treats, honestly the cutest proof package of all time. And I'm fully intending to try my best to teach Hippo how to talk. I don't know how it'll work because I think she's not the cleverest dog. She's not the cleverest breed, and she's not the cleverest of her breed. So she might struggle. It might take some patience, which I don't have, but we're really going to try. Okay, nearly there. The next book that I hauled and read all in one go as an ebook is Simplexity by Kylie Reid. And this was one, so Kylie Reid is the author of Such a Fun Age, which is one of my favourite books of all time, I will say. This was a short story by her, and I felt like I didn't understand it, but then I also haven't been able to stop thinking about it. So it's about an Asian American young woman in a workplace noticing the way that she is being treated by some of her co-workers, and then also noticing some of the unfairnesses in the way her very few black co-workers are being treated. So the kind of main crux of this short story is, as a perk, they have this trendy startup company. One of the perks they offer the employees is haircuts, like Friday afternoon haircuts, which just isn't a very accessible perk to the black employees. And so she notices that some of the white employees are actually getting twice as long because they're getting one of the black girls to sign up for it, and then they can get the double slot and be like, oh, Martha isn't coming. One of the things that Kylie Reid is brilliant at, and why I loved Such a Fun Age so much, is I guess that's why it's called simplexity, the complexity of the way she presents these issues. She talks about these seemingly simple things, but suddenly from a million different perspectives. So in Such a Fun Age, it is about performative white allyship in a way that doesn't just paint the white woman as a straight up villain. She's not just an evil racist person. She just continually ignores her internal racism and kind of uses it to make herself look better. And this is kind of more on that same theme, but I found it even harder to recognise, which just shows that I have more things to question. So the main character, who is this Asian American woman, she wants to stick up for her black colleagues who she sees aren't being kind of treated fairly with these perks, but the way that she goes about doing it kind of upsets at least one of them. And it's just, I can't even say too much about it, because then there's this whole extra little side plot at the end where it finishes on this very confusing note where you're like, who's using who in this situation? It's just very full of simplexity, and I didn't fully get it, but I feel like it will keep whirring around in my brain, and hopefully I'll be able to grow some new thoughts because of it. Okay, we're basically done. The final thing I did was I unhauled 3 books. So I did the Try a Chapter tag video recently, which I will link to below, and based on reading the first chapter of almost my entire TBR trolley, I gave away any books that I just knew I wasn't interested to continue, and so you can go over and watch that happening. I don't even have them anymore because I got rid of them, but I unhauled a non-fiction book called Sex, Robots and Vegan Meat, which, to be honest, I am interested in, but I think I will listen to it as an audiobook at some stage, just because I know what I'm like with reading non-fiction. And I also unhauled 2 historical fiction books by Hannah Kent, because I just thought they maybe weren't my genre. In the comments of that video, so many people telling me that I shouldn't have unhauled them, but you know what you're gonna do? I have so many books to read. So, if I have done all of my maths as I go correctly, I believe that I have not only balanced my books, but I have actually tipped the scale even further in terms of making that TBR even smaller. So we now have just 36 books left on my TBR. I don't know what my end goal is. People always comment 36 is nothing, I have hundreds, and yeah, I know, I started with a much bigger number too. I just kind of want to keep going and see how small I can get it, really. I want it to consistently fit on just these 2 shelves, and at the moment it spills over sometimes, and I want to get it so that it's always safely there, so that I can just look at this trolley and be like, that's my TBR, that's my whole TBR, that's everything that I am waiting to read, or rather is waiting for me to read it, and it won't feel overwhelming. Usually at the end of these videos I then go on to do my book trail game, but I decided to separate them out because you know what, book trail deserves its time in the spotlight. It needs its time to shine, and so hang in there because that video will be coming next week. Until then, happy Friday, love you all, goodbye.
She's a Mona Lisa, everyone's lining up to see her. She's a Mona Lisa, everyone's lining up to see her. There must be something bad.